Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the monthly economic briefing presented by the Kenan Institute of Private Enterprise at UNC Kenan-Flagler Business School. I'm External Affairs Assistant Director Rob Knapp, and it's great to have you with us this morning. So let's check this off. Black Friday, check. Cyber Monday, check. Giving Tuesday, check. Consumer Confidence Friday. Welcome to Consumer Confidence Friday here on the briefing. We will have our research director, Camelia Kuhnen, on with us in a moment to talk about how U.S. consumers are feeling as the holiday shopping season progresses. We've also got some new jobs numbers to look at. The jobs market is back in business after an October that was slowed by storms and strikes. Numbers to talk about there, and some other things to discuss as well. We're going to have that coming up in just a couple of minutes. First, I'm going to give you a quick run of show. Professor Kuhnen will come on, do 15 to 20 minutes of presentation. Then we'll have about 10 minutes left for questions from the audience. You can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. If you're with the media, please include your organization so we'll know to prioritize those. We want to make sure and get those answered. If you're joining us by phone today, you can also submit a question. You can do that by emailing to me at rob_knapp@kenan-flagler.unc.edu. I will keep an eye out for those. Show usually goes about 30 minutes. Sometimes we'll go an extra minute or two if we need to finish up with some questions, but you will have no problem getting to your 10 o'clock this morning. So again, we're glad to have you with us. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our research director, Cammie Kuhnen, who will take the presentation from here. Good morning, Cammie.
Good morning, Rob. It's very nice to see everybody. Today we got an interesting report it's going to tell us that things with the labor market are a little bit complicated. So what happened last month? Last month we saw some really low numbers in terms of the changes in non-farm payrolls. And that happened because of two hurricanes and because of the strike at Boeing. So the payroll numbers were pretty low, 12,000 jobs added in October. This was actually just revised to 36,000. But again, this happened because of sort of unusual circumstances. Now, the numbers we just saw this morning look much better. So we were expecting to see 218,000 jobs added. The actual number came in a little higher, actually at 227,000. So this might look to you like it's really good news in the labor market. This monthly number, this increase of 227,000 is actually significantly higher relative to the average that we have seen for the past 12 months. So just based on this one number, you'd think that something is going on. The labor market is, again, maybe overheating. Economic activity may be overheating, but that's not probably what's going on. I think that this number, the November figure, should be actually averaged out with the October figure to give us a better sense of the change in the payrolls that we've seen over the past couple of months, right? So if you average these two numbers, 36,000 and 227,000, you'd get an estimate, actually, an average of these two numbers. That's pretty close to what we've seen in terms of payroll growth in the economy in the recent half a year to a year. So I don't believe there's something unusual going on this month in terms of payrolls relative to the longer time trend. I think it's just a correction given the circumstances that we saw in October. Those very unusual things that happened, hurricanes and strikes. Manufacturing, you'd think that we were expecting to see a bit more of a bounce back after strike activity ended, but the change in manufacturing payrolls came in a little lower than what we expected. So, you know, it's better than last month, but not maybe as good as you wanted for that number to be. In terms of hourly earnings, we are expecting to see a month-to-month increase of 0.3%. That number came in at 0.4%. It's very much in line with what we've seen basically for the past year or so. So in terms of wages, what this means is that there's been a pretty healthy increase on a month-to-month basis, but also over the past year or so. And I'll come back to wages in a little bit. The number of weekly hours worked, that's pretty steady at 34.3, so not much of a surprise there. There were two interesting figures that I think are a little bit concerning for US economic activity. So the first thing is that the unemployment rate ticked up from 4.1%, where it had been for the previous couple of months, to 4.2%. So this, you know, this tells you that maybe policymakers should now think more about labor market situation versus inflation, right? And we sort of saw, we've seen this happen over the past couple of months for sure, that there is this sort of renewed stronger interest in addressing unemployment relative to being too worried about inflation. Inflation, as we will see a few slides from here, inflation has abated significantly. So, you know, if I were a policymaker right now, I would look at this tick up in unemployment, which is, you know, relative to historical standards is not high by any means, but it's going in the wrong direction, right? So it might give a little bit more impetus to the Fed to lower interest rates to help spur economic activity and help with the labor market situation. The other change that we saw this morning that maybe is not so good is that the labor force participation rate has declined from 62.7. That was our expectation. It actually came to 62.5%. It's a little bit lower than the actual number that we saw in October, which was 62.6%. This amounts to about 200,000 fewer people who are in the labor force. And, you know, again, if you're a policymaker, what you try to do is just to encourage that participation rate to creep up, you know. There'll be some good news about the labor force participation rate that I'll mention in a second. But, you know, there's a segment of the population for which actually this rate is pretty healthy. But you know, this decline that we've seen this morning is not the best possible news. So I wanted to see this this picture because it's telling you what has been the monthly change in total non-farm employment that we've seen for the past 3 years or so. And the reading for this morning that we just saw, you know, it looks very high relative to the previous month, October, but like I said, it's probably just a sort of a reaction to the fact that last month the figures were artificially too low. So again, I would take the numbers for November and October, average them out, basically average out the last two columns in this picture here, and I would say the pace of job growth in the country is still is good, but it's been declining over time, which is normal. You know, we're trying to go to a more stable place. So the unemployment rate, as I was mentioning earlier, relative to historical standards, is still pretty low at 4.2%, but it has been creeping up, right? And so again, the Fed probably right now should be shifting their attention a little bit from tackling inflation, which is not as big of an issue anymore, to worrying about the labor market, about unemployment. Now, the fact that you see unemployment going up actually, together with other signs that the labor market is cooling, is helping the Fed in terms of its inflation fighting mandate, because this should put at some point, this should put a damper on wage growth. And when you reduce the pace of wage growth, that should help reduce inflation. Somehow surprising, like I was mentioning a minute ago, the wage growth has been something along the lines of 0.3, 0.4% per month, or about 4% per year, for quite a while now, for the past year or so. So it's interesting that the unemployment rate going up, that hasn't changed wage growth much, but this cannot really persist. If you have higher and higher employment, you should be able to see some pressure on the rate of growth of wages over time, which again would help you with reducing the chance of inflation sort of spiraling out of control, like we've seen a couple of years ago. So in terms of the labor force participation rate, this morning we saw that number that was a little bit lower from what we expected, and also from what we had seen in previous months. So about 200,000 people are no longer in the labor force relative to the previous month. So overall, if you look at all those who would like to work, that number has dropped from month to month. That being said, if you look at labor force participation rates by gender, and if you focus on people who are sort of in their prime working years, from the age of 25 to the age of 54, you see that for men, that participation rate is pretty much at where the level that it was right before COVID hit. So we've rebounded in that sense. If you look at men, whereas if you look at women, actually, their participation rate for women in this age group of 25 to 54 years, that number is actually above where it was before COVID, and it pretty much is at very close to historical highs. So I really like this. I really like to see that more and more women are choosing to be part of the labor force. We basically need more people to be in the labor force. And in the past, we have relied on immigration to help in that respect. It is unclear, given the change in administration, whether or not immigration will be a source of labor force participants in the next few years. So, whatever segment of the population we find was willing to work, this is going to be good for U.S. economic growth. There's one segment of the population whose participation rate continues to remain low several years after the pandemic, and this is individuals who are 55 years and over. You see that sharp drop right around the time when COVID hit in the participation rate of these individuals. It's not coming back up. So I think that this segment is not going to provide necessarily a boost to the U.S. labor force in the next several years. I mentioned that inflation has been lowered significantly in the past year or so. You can see this in this picture. If you look at the core PCE numbers, whether you measure them over the past 3 months or the past 6 or the past 12 months or so year to year, basically inflation has been pretty close to where the Fed wanted to be, in the range of about 2.7 to 2.8% on an annualized basis. It is above 2%, but it's much, much better than where it was, only a year ago. So I think that we are approaching a stable situation in terms of inflation, assuming no big shocks will happen. So I know that a lot of you right now are thinking about the new administration and whether or not there will be tariffs imposed, for certain goods from certain countries. Typically, economists think that tariffs would lead to higher prices. We will see if that's going to happen. or maybe will avoid actual price increases or actual tariffs. But for now, inflation is, or the rates of price growth is very reasonable, pretty close to where the Fed wants it to be. Now, again, it's not 2%. The Fed, when they meet on December 18th, at the FOMC meeting, maybe they'll say, inflation is still not at 2%. We need to keep interest rates high. But if you look at, for example, the Fed funds futures contract prices, and you infer from those prices what is the probability that the market puts that there will be a rate cut at the next FOMC meeting on December the 18th. This probability, as of a minute before we started this broadcast, was about 91%. So I think that the broader market probably believes that, again, the Fed's not going to be super concerned about this, the inflation figure, which has been reasonable, but is going to be more concerned about the unemployment rate. Interestingly, before the payroll numbers were released this morning, the market gave a 72% probability that we would see a rate cut on December 18th. And after the employment report came out, that probability jumped from 72% to 91%. So all that was in that payroll report released this morning basically overall had the effect of increasing in the mind of market participants that the chance that we will see a rate cut in the next couple of weeks. And again, I see why that's happening. I think that the unemployment number is a little bit concerning. Inflation, maybe not so much. I said a little while ago that we have seen pretty steady wage growth over time, and it's at about 4% per year if you look at wage growth in nominal terms, and it is above the rate of inflation. Okay, so if you think about inflation for the past year or so to be around 2.7, 2.8%, and wage growth to be about 4%. So in real time, in real terms, people have been earning more money relative to a year ago. Can we sustain this increase in wages? It is possible, but only if we do not see this huge, higher and higher increases in the unemployment rate. So, if I were thinking about my own wage profile over the next few years, right now, I would not be expecting to see huge wage gains, given the softening that I see in the labor market. Now, this is looking forward. Looking forward, the labor market probably will soften some more, even with the Fed cutting rates. We're going to a place of basically where we're normalizing what's happening in the labor market. But in the past year and a half, because we have seen wage growth be above inflation, because in real terms people were earning more money than the years before, probably that explains why we saw very healthy consumption growth in this country for the past couple of years, and this is reflected in the GDP growth. So, and why? And it's because consumption is a large chunk, more than 2/3 of GDP in the United States. So the American consumer has been carrying this economy, right? And they've been doing so probably because they've seen in real terms their wages increase over time. Will this continue? I don't know. We will look together at some data about consumer confidence in just a second here, to get a sense of, like, right now, how people are feeling about the economy and about the prospects of the economy. Will this change in the next couple of months if we see more of these reports with the unemployment rate taking up? Probably, but we're not in the future yet. We're here today, so all we can discuss are today's numbers. this chart makes a similar point to what we were just discussing, which is that in terms of employment costs, it's just sort of a similar measure to wage costs. The pace of growth in labor costs is still high. It's not quite as high as it used to be 1 or 2 years ago, but it's still pretty close to 4% per year. And if you just look at this number, right, just at the wage growth number, you would be worried about inflation, maybe going back up. But if you combine this with what we've seen in terms of the unemployment rate ticking up, then maybe again, if I were a policymaker, I wouldn't be so concerned about inflation going back up. In terms of the GDP growth that we've seen for the past few quarters, very healthy growth. And again, I believe that's happening because the American consumer has been pretty confident, given that their wages have increased in real terms over time. And so we see really good, healthy economic growth in terms of GDP growth each quarter. The last reading for Q3 was 2.8% annualized GDP growth in real terms. This is very sustainable, very healthy economic growth. Hopefully, we'll keep seeing these types of numbers. And there's another indicator that I really like to look at to assess the health of the labor market. And this is coming from the JOLTS report. This was released a few days ago. And what we've seen for the past few months is that the number of job openings has been declining steadily. In October, it ticked up a little bit relative to September, but it's around 7.7 million, way below what it used to be, 1 or 2 years ago. So you see this clear trend, downward trend in the number of job openings. The rates of quits, hires and layoffs have been pretty steady, but the number that that sort of gives you a good picture of just how heated or not heated the labor market is this ratio of how many job openings there are per unemployed worker. If you think about the pre-COVID time and sort of like the steady, the normal time, that number back then was 1.2. Right now we're 1.1, and this number of 1.1 job openings per unemployed worker is way below the peak that we saw in March 2022, where it was 2. There were 2 job openings for each unemployed worker. So this number has gone down. Now it's very much in line with historical figures. So basically, the labor market is normalizing, is getting to a place where we're not concerned about it being overheated. In line with what we saw for manufacturing numbers that I was showing you on the first slide, from a different source from the ISM, we see that there was a mild rebound the past month in manufacturing. This is the blue line here, but there's been a cooling off in the services sector. So again, if I were the Fed, I would look at this and think, okay, maybe we should think about economic growth rather than just fixate on the inflation number per se. So if you combine what we know about unemployment and about the inflation rate, you can look at this misery index that economists have put together, and it's been pretty steady, pretty low and pretty steady relative to what we've seen in years close to COVID. And so the question is, how do households feel? Like objectively, we are in a pretty good place in terms of how the economy is doing relative to, again, what happened in the year or two after COVID. Are households feeling that we're in a pretty good place? And a few months ago, the answer was no. Households were pretty negative about the economy, but we have seen actually a rebound in consumer confidence, whether you measure it using the Conference Board measure or if you use the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment measure. You see in the past 2-3 months, there's a rebound in how consumers feel about the economy, which is really good. Now, in terms of absolute values of the people's optimism about the economy, we're still below where we were before COVID, which is super interesting. I'm wondering if we'll ever get to those readings before COVID. Maybe we're just in a different sort of frame of reference now. But for sure, we've seen a rebound in consumer confidence. And some people attribute the rebound we saw in November to what happened in the election. It could also very well be that people are more excited about the economy, more optimistic because they have seen inflation drop. So for whatever reason, the American consumer is feeling right now better than just a few months ago. They're feeling pretty good about their present situation, how the economy is right now, but also you see that they have improved expectations about the future of the economy. If you look in the short future, in the next near future. And this might be because in terms of net worth, all households have done pretty well for the past couple of years. Their net worth, actually, no matter who you look at in terms of where they are in the distribution of wealth, their net worth has had positive growth in 2023 and 2024. So we're sitting on assets that are worth more, and in part it's because of our homes, right? So about 2/3 of the people in this country are homeowners. The median home price has increased since February 2020 by about 48%, right? So a bunch of us own homes. These assets have increased in value quite a bit. And of course, this has helped with consumer confidence, together with that real increase in wages that we saw in the past year or so. This probably also helped prop up consumption. So going forward, are people going to keep spending? Will we keep seeing those nice numbers for GDP growth? Maybe. We do see that people are starting to get a little bit worried. If you look at the rate of increases in personal consumption expenditures, it's dropped in the last reading. So maybe we're going to spend a little bit less fast as before. But this just could be basically a 1 month sort of a situation. This is, if you look at the blue line in this figure here, it shows you how consumption has grown from, or expenditures have grown from 1 month to the next. We see a slower rate of growth in the last reading, but who knows if it's going to continue to be slow. So will households be careful from now on? I would say that probably they will be. Again, because of also what's happening in terms of the unemployment numbers. And they should be careful because if you look at their personal savings rate, it's not very high. It was much higher right after COVID because probably of the government stimulus money. But we're not saving a ton necessarily, and maybe wage growth will slow down, and maybe unemployment will pick up a little bit. So I would say households probably are cautious, and that's probably a good thing. Well, let me say one more thing about how people think about inflation. This is good news. If you look at people's expectations about inflation the next year or the next 5 years, they're very nicely anchored right around 3%. So it's not that people believe that prices will spiral out of control in the future. So that's good for the Fed because when they tweak the Fed funds rate, they do so to make sure that people's inflation expectations do not get unanchored, right? That they're tied to this nice 2%, 3% range. All right, so like I said, I think we're going to see a rate cut December the 18th. That's at least what we saw right now is a reaction in the market for Fed funds futures. And then about a year from now, we'll probably see rates in the range of 3.7 to 4%. So this is it for me for right now. I think we're in a pretty good place. I think the Fed will cut rates maybe 25 basis points in December and maybe another couple of cuts next year because they want to make sure that unemployment rate doesn't go up that much more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cami. A lot of moving pieces there. Thank you for helping to make the complicated a little less complicated and connecting all those things together. For folks who have questions, we have room for a couple. You can go ahead and submit those using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. You can email them to me if you're with us by phone, rob_knapp@kenan-flagler.unc.edu. It sounds like one of the usual questions is, what should Triangle CEOs take away from this? You had a couple of things in your sum up there. It also sounds like there might be indicators of some downward pressure on wage growth going forward, which would be something new.
I would say yes. If I were a CEO right now, I would breathe a little bit better in terms of labor costs. I think that probably I won't have to push up wages of my employees by 4 or 5% per year over the next year, probably. Again, this is assuming that inflation stays put. And we have this huge amount of uncertainty that relates to tariffs and relates to other policies that the next administration might put in place. So this can all change dramatically, in the first half of 2025. So if inflation numbers stay where they are right now, then again, if I were a CEO, I would be quite content about what that means for my labor costs.
Okay. I know people are looking at a lot of indicators right now with the recent election in mind and trying to say, what can we take out of this? It's a little early to be looking at the labor numbers for that, isn't it?
Well, there are, again, depending on which policies will be put in place, a lot can happen in terms of, say, the number of immigrants we will allow in, and what that will mean for the size of the labor force. In terms of the tariffs, we'll see. These policies can be crafted in a way that they actually will leave a lot of room for economic growth to continue in a healthy way, right? If you think about tariffs, you can write the rules so that there will be all kinds of exceptions, all kinds of loopholes, right? And you can still say you have tariffs, but really maybe they will only impact a very narrow segment of the goods, say, that we import. So there is still a lot of uncertainty, and again, for now, the economy looks good. It could continue to go like this in 2025, or it may not. And we will all have to just basically wait and see.
Right. A lot of questions left to answer.
Yes.
Okay, here's one from somebody that's on with us today. Is there anything you are seeing in the early holiday spending data that suggests confidence or concern about the economy?
From what we gathered from these consumer confidence surveys, it's looking like it's going to be a good holiday season. I think that the American consumer will spend this season. And I'm saying that because it was a clear uptick, a clear rebound in confidence in November. And that typically carries through. Unless, again, there will be some very strange, shock to the economy in the next month or so. I believe that this boost in consumer confidence we saw in November will carry people through in terms of their spending for the holidays.
Okay, and I guess we'll do one more here and then let people run and get that next cup of coffee before their 10 o'clock. Are we in a real estate bubble because of expectation of mortgage rates to go down? Supply lower than normal?
Great question. So if you look at mortgage rates, they're not pinned down by the Fed funds rate. The Fed has lowered this Fed funds rate by 75 basis points recently, but mortgage rates did not really drop. So we're still around 6.7, 6.8% APR for 30-year mortgage right now. And that's because those mortgage rates are tied to the 10-year Treasury rates. And that's not something that the FOMC, announcements control. So why are those mortgage rates so high? Again, it's because the 10-year Treasury rates are high. Why are those high? It's probably because we are still worried about what's going to happen to inflation maybe in the longer run, or what's going to happen to economic activity in the longer run. So I think that, the Fed lowering the Fed funds rate doesn't necessarily mean that we will have cheap access to mortgages, and that's going to spur buying necessarily. So, if demand, I think the demand will continue to be subdued because mortgage rates are high. So that should help with home prices not increasing even further.
Okay. Okay, I lied. One more. This one's from Barbara Senich, but I'll shorten the question, so that will help a little. Uh, is there something we could do policy-wise to encourage the hiring of older workers, given the numbers labor participation for over 55?
Very, very good question. It's part of what happened was that older workers got health-related concerns when COVID hit, right? And then they decided to stay home because it was dangerous to be in the workplace. You don't want to get COVID, you don't want to die. And that might have actually gotten some people used to just being at home, being out of the labor force. I was actually expecting to see a rebound in the participation rate of older people back in 2022, 23, when we really needed workers and firms were giving nice wage raises and they were fighting to get people to work in services and retail, but that rate did not budge. So I think there is maybe a cultural shock, if you want, or maybe it's just a different, it's a new habit, it's a new expectation for older individuals that, it's okay to not work. How do you change that mindset? I don't know. Like I said, wage growth was there. Employers were willing to hire older people. They was desperate for workers back in 22, 23. But that didn't really budge the participation rate. So it's a very, very good question. I wish I had an answer to that, because I would love to see that rate of participation of older workers go up. Why? Because they bring so much expertise and just wisdom in the workplace, and they need to teach the next generation how to do their job well, right?
Well, thank you very much, Cami. As a member of that demographic, I appreciate you saying that. Thanks very much. Great session today. Appreciate you bringing your insight to all of these subjects, and can't wait to do it again soon. Thanks again to all the folks who are with us today. As always, we appreciate your questions, always good ones, always keep the briefing rolling. For those of you in the media, we'd love to continue the conversation. If you would have a question that you'd like to ask Cami or any of our other experts, please contact me and I'll set that up. Rob_Knapp at Kenan-Flagler.unc.edu. For everybody out there, we'd love to have you visit the website, kenaninstitute.unc.edu. Lots going on. We talked a little bit about manufacturing today. I should also mention we're in a collaboration with Fifth Third Bank. There's a site called empoweringamericancities.com, and there is a piece that went up there recently on manufacturing, a manufacturing mythbuster. So you might go take a look at that. Very interesting stuff. And manufacturing is important to what's going on in the economy. Let's see, anything else to let you know about? I think that's everything on the list. Again, we appreciate you being here. This is the last briefing of 2024. We hope to see you back here January 10th, 2025, and we'll start another year of briefings. Thanks again. Have a great Friday.